Hello viewers, welcome to this edition of Lectures Anatomica. Today we will take up the discussion on the orbit. Take a look at this photograph. This is the superior view of the cranial cavity, which has been cut in a horizontal section. Let's get the orientation of this section. That is the anterior cranial fossa, flashing on the left side. Immediately following it is the middle cranial fossa, once again being flashed on the left side. Notice that the brain has been removed and this is the empty cranial cavity shown for the orientation. We'll slowly take you over to the dissection of the orbit. Given below in a diagrammatic form is the orientation, the anterior, posterior, right and left sides are marked. Next is the frontal sinus. You can see at the upper end of the photograph the frontal sinus is flashing. Followed by the midline structure, Crusta galli. That's the midline structure in the anterior cranial fossa, right above the nasal cavity. Now, immediately lateral to it are the ethmoidal air cells. I repeat, immediately lateral to it are the ethmoidal air cells. That's the ethmoidal air cells flashing. Now that line, dotted line is the lesser wing of the sphenoid bone on the right side. I repeat, it is on the right side. Now marked in yellow is the cut section of the optic nerve. Now shown in brown there is the orbital area. Roof of the orbit has been removed and that flashing region there shown in brown is the orbital cavity, right orbit viewed from above. Now this photograph was merely to give you an orientation. We will zoom in on the orbital cavity for further discussion. Now you see, that's the area of dissection which we will take up now for discussion. Now before we go further, let's have a look at the walls of the orbital cavity orbit, the bony walls. That's why on the left, yes, another photograph of the dry skull has been introduced to give you the orientation. Now the apex is the optic canal which transmits the optic nerve. Base is anterior and that is the orbital margins. That means this is a four-sided pyramid. Apex is posterior, anterior is the orbital margin. At the posterior, that is the apex, there is the optic canal which we will demarcate as the point referring to the apex. But right below the apex you can also see the superior orbital fissure and the inferior orbital fissure. The two fissures meet almost at the optic canal. There is a small ridge of bone separating the two. Now that is the superior wall formed by the orbital plate of the frontal bone. This frontal bone separates the orbit from the anterior cranial fossa. That's the reason why any sharp instruments that goes through the eye, goes through the orbit, can get into the anterior cranial fossa by piercing through the frontal bone. Medial wall, two bones, the lacrimal bone and the orbital plate of the ethmoid bone. So that's the orbital plate of the ethmoid bone. Lateral wall, the greater wing of the sphenoid and that's the zygomatic bone. I repeat, greater wing of the sphenoid and the zygomatic bone. Similarly, floor is formed by the maxilla And located within these four walls is the eyeball, and that small animation was to give you an orientation how the eyeball is lodged. Now we'll go into finer details. Now that's the diagrammatic overlay of the location of the eyeball as seen in this photograph. It is obscured by muscles, hence I have given a orientation to the eyeball in a slightly diagrammatic form. That is the axis of the medial wall of the orbit. That is the lateral wall of the orbit. You can see that they meet posteriorly a little behind the apex. That is the axis of the eyeball, considering as if the eyeballs are facing absolutely forwards. Now that line is the axis of the orbital cavity, which runs roughly from the apex to the center of the base. That is the axis of the orbit. Notice that the axis of the eyeball and the axis of the orbit mark an angle of 45 degrees to each other. This axis of the orbit along with the corresponding axis of the opposite orbit forms a 90-degree angle. So these are all the points for orientation, because based on these axes and orientation the muscle actions are described. Now suppose in this orientation we take up a muscle, for example the superior rectus. You will notice that strictly speaking the superior rectus will perform elevation of the eyeball, provided the eyeball axis was coinciding with the axis of the orbit. In other words, in extreme abduction of the eyeball, the superior rectus will perform a simple elevation of the eyeball. But this is not really so. The axis of the eyeball is anteroposterior, which does not coincide with the axis of the orbit. As a result, in this position, acting from the apex and pulling the base, you will notice because of this the superior rectus muscle will not only cause elevation, it will also cause a slight amount of adduction and intorsion. That means inward rotation towards the nasal side. See, that's the arrow mark telling that it will cause abduction. It will cause adduction, and that to show the rotatory movement along an anteroposterior axis, that is the intorsion. Now this is how muscle movements are described in the rest of the discussion. To get an orientation of muscle action, you need to know these axes and how one is oriented with the other. That's the purpose of this. Next, that's the orbit with the eyeball shown as a superimposed image. Now we will discuss all the muscles one by one. The flashing brown structure is the levator palpebrae superioris, a large muscle. That's the origin, takes origin from the inferior surface of the greater wing of the sphenoid bone. That's the insertion. It expands into a large expansion, an aponeurotic expansion, which is inserted into, it divides into two parts. One part goes to the skin of the eyelid. The other part goes deeper and is merged with the superior tarsal plate. The part that goes, that is the deeper part, has a muscle, smooth muscle known as the superior tarsal muscle, which has its innervation from the sympathetic nervous system. Paralysis of this muscle causes partial ptosis. Now that's the muscle levator palpebrae superioris. As it expands anteriorly, it is closely associated with the lacrimal gland, as you can see in that flashing animation there. The lacrimal gland wraps itself around the lateral edge of the levator palpebrae superioris. As a result, this gland, see, that is the muscle. You can see how the gland has wrapped itself around it. As a result, this gland has an orbital part superficial to it and a palpebral part deep to it. Medially, the levator palpebrae superioris is extended on to the medial um, palpebral ligament. Now that's the ligament, medial palpebral ligament. This being the case, the muscle causes elevation of the upper lid. This muscle causes elevation of the upper lid. I have shown it on the opposite side. The lid is closed, and the direction of the arrow mark tells you how the lid is raised, resulting in opening of the eye. Next muscle we will take up is the superior oblique muscle. We will have a look at this muscle. Now that is the superior oblique muscle. It takes origin posteriorly from the body of the sphenoid bone, runs across the close to the medial wall of the orbit. I repeat, it goes close to the medial wall, right above the medial rectus muscle, till it reaches a pulley close to the supromedial angle of the eye, takes a turn at the pulley, returns back, and that tendinous expansion is attached to the upper posterolateral quadrant of the eyeball. I repeat, takes a turn. This tendinous expansion is attached to the upper posterolateral quadrant of the eyeball. As it does so, it is behind the point of intersection of the anteroposterior and the transverse axis of the eyeball at this location. Just keep this in mind. It is very, very important when we discuss the action of this muscle. See, that's the axis. The tendon goes behind the axis to be attached to the upper posterolateral quadrant of the eyeball. Now, if the muscle acts like at its apex, the corresponding movement that occurs at the base or the tendinous expansion will be seen in this next few slides. Now you see, this is a photograph or a diagrammatic representation of the eyeball viewed from front. The right and the lateral and the nasal orientation of this is given. That means on the left is the temporal side, and the right is the nasal side. If the superior oblique acts from the diagram as I shown you, on the basis of the diagram I shown you, it raises the posterior quadrant, it makes the posterior quadrant come forwards. As a result, the anterior quadrant is brought down, and this will be the result. In other words, this muscle causes depression of the eyeball. Now, that is the anteroposterior axis. I repeat, that is the anteroposterior axis. The muscle, as I told you, is attached to the upper posterolateral quadrant of the eyeball. When it contracts, it results in intorsion. I repeat, an action by name intorsion. That means the 12 o'clock position of the cornea is turned towards the 3 o'clock position. Now that's the animation there. You can see the blue arc of a circle showing how the muscle acts and how the end result, the intorsion, takes place. Let's view it based on this diagram now. The view is anteroposterior. You can see the cornea in front. Now that is the 12 o'clock position, and that arrow mark there is reflecting on the 12 o'clock position. When the muscle contracts, this will be the arc or arc formation. As a result, along the anteroposterior axis, the 12 o'clock position will now be moved towards the 3 o'clock position. Next, we will see one more diagram. The same thing in superior view. The anteroposterior axis is shown. Then that will be the arc. As a result, the 12 o'clock position is moved to the 3 o'clock position. This is yet another demonstration of intorsion. Take the next example. This is once again the superior view. Watch carefully where the muscle is attached. The view is superior. That is the other axial line. You can see the intersection of the two lines. You can see roughly the tendinous expansion Note the insertion behind the intersection between these two axes. Now that is very, very important. As a result, if this muscle contracts, this is how the tendon is pulled. As a result of the pull of the tendon, you watch carefully what happens. The front end is moved laterally, and that is because the back or the posterior quadrant is being moved medially. The axis of rotation is supro-inferior. Therefore, this muscle, superior oblique, causes abduction of the eyeball. In summary, the superior oblique causes depression, intorsion, and abduction of the eyeball. We'll move over to the next namely the medial rectus. Now that's the muscle shown in flashing animation there. It is a fairly large muscle, extraocular muscle. Takes origin from the medial part of the common tendinous ring. There is nothing much to describe about the action of the muscle, since it runs forward from the apex towards along the medial wall of the orbit. It inserts into the sclera like other muscles, about 5 mm, 5 to 5.5 mm behind the limbus in front of the equator. It is closely associated as an extension, the medial palpebral ligament. From its sheath, it gives an attachment to the medial palpebral ligament. It is supplied by the inferior division of the oculomotor. Now, action, it's simple action, adduction of the eyeball. That is the line of action of the muscle. As a result, the eyeball is moved towards the navel. Similarly, lateral rectus, once again from the common tendinous ring. Unlike other muscles, it has two heads of origin. Course runs forwards and laterally, similar to that of the medial rectus, but only thing is on the lateral side. It inserts similar to the medial rectus, but only thing is on the lateral side, about 7 mm behind the limbus. It once again gives a sheath, like once again the medial rectus, to the lateral check ligament. Nerve supplied by the abducent nerve, I repeat, not the oculomotor. Action, this is the, watch carefully, that's the muscle, and if this is the line of action of the muscle, the end result is abduction. It's a simple medial and lateral rectus causes simple adduction and abduction respectively. Next, superior rectus. I already gave you a demonstration of the action of this muscle in an earlier demonstration. Origin, once again common tendinous ring, runs laterally at an angle of 27 degrees. This is very important, to the anteroposterior axis of the eyeball. Inserts to the sclera about 8 mm behind the limbus. Its sheath is fused with that of the levator palpebrae superioris. That's the lacrimal nerve shown in the lateral end. That's the anteroposterior axis. That's the location of the superior rectus. That's the action of the muscle. Results in, watch carefully, adduction, intorsion, and elevation. You can see that blue arrow is for intorsion. That's about the superior rectus. Inferior rectus is not shown in this demonstration. However, it is diagrammatically represented because it is below all the superficial structures in the orbit. So that's the muscle. Note that as it goes below the orbit, it has been shaded. Takes origin from the common tendinous ring. Once again, similar to that of the superior rectus, runs forwards at an angle of 27 degrees. It is more or less parallel with the superior rectus, but it is below the eyeball. Nerve supply, inferior division of the oculomotor nerve. Action, in contrast to the superior rectus, it causes depression, adduction, and external rotation of the eyeball. I repeat, depression, because it brings the cornea down. Adduction, which is similar to that of the superior rectus because it runs at an angle of 27 degrees to the anteroposterior axis of the eyeball, and external rotation because it causes outward arc of a circle. The 12 o'clock position is shifted to the 9 o'clock position. Next muscle, the inferior oblique. This muscle is on the inferior part of the orbital cavity. Origin anteromedial part of the floor of the orbit, close to the nasolacrimal canal opening. Runs backwards and laterally and is attached to a position corresponding to the superior oblique but on the inferior side. That means inferior posterolateral quadrant. Now you can see the white arrow suggests it causes abduction, and the blue arrow suggests that it causes extorsion. I repeat, it causes abduction, extortion and elevation. I repeat, it causes elevation, abduction and external rotation of the eyeball. Now that is the position of the tendon of insertion. That's the way it is located. The muscle is on the inferior aspect. That is why we will make it a little lighter shade, suggesting that it is on the inferior aspect. Position of the inferior oblique below the eyeball. You see, we have lightened it, so suggests that it is below the actions of the inferior oblique. We will try to study it a little in detail. You can see the diagram there. View, anteroposterior view. Now that is the location of the inferior oblique. When the muscle contracts, watch what happens to the 12 o'clock position. Thus, when the muscle contracts, turns, that is the extorsion. As a result, the 12 o'clock position is brought to the 9 o'clock position, which is in contrast to what we saw earlier. This muscle causes extorsion. This movement of the 12 o'clock position of the cornea to the 9 o'clock position, as viewed from front, is known as extorsion. Similarly, another diagram, you can see the location of the inferior oblique. Once again, the lateral and the nasal part are depicted. If the muscle contracts, watch carefully. This causes the inferior part to be brought down. As a result, using the transverse axis, left to right axis, cornea is raised upwards. This is an example of elevation. See, that's the end result. The cornea is raised upwards. Next, detailed description. You can see the location of the nerves, how they are distributed in the orbital cavity. That's the trigeminal nerve flashing. Anteriorly, it divides the supratrochlear, the supraorbital and the frontal nerve. The medial of the two is the supratrochlear. The lateral thicker one is the supraorbital. These two are formed from the frontal nerve. The frontal nerve and the lacrimal are the two branches. The third branch we will take up a little later, that is the nasolacrimal, nasociliary. Now, right now, the trigeminal divides into one lacrimal, two frontal, and thereafter the nasociliary. The frontal divides into supratrochlear and supraorbital, which we will see in the dissection of the scalp. The lacrimal goes along the lateral, close to the lateral wall of the orbit to reach the lacrimal gland. As it moves towards the lacrimal gland, it picks up branches from the zygomatic nerve, where the parasympathetic component, the secretomotor fibers, are contributed to it from the pterygopalatine ganglion, and that is distributed by the lacrimal nerve to the lacrimal gland. The corresponding artery accompanies the nerve. That's the third nerve, the nasociliary. I repeat, the ophthalmic nerve divides into one, the frontal, second the lacrimal, and now the nasociliary. The nasociliary in turn gives anterior ethmoidal nerve and an infratrochlear nerve. These are its two terminal branches. Now that's the ciliary ganglion, to which it makes a sensory contribution. I repeat, a sensory contribution is contributed by the nasociliary. That's the ciliary ganglion. The parasympathetic contribution doesn't come from the nasociliary. It comes from the oculomotor via the nerve to the inferior oblique. So that's the ciliary ganglion. That's the posterior ethmoidal nerve. Other branches. That's the long ciliary nerve. More medially from the ciliary ganglion, you can see the short ciliary nerves. That's the long ciliary nerves. Two long ciliary nerves. Further medial to it are the short ciliary nerves. Next, the ophthalmic artery and its branches. The ophthalmic artery supplies the contents of the orbit. It's a branch of the internal carotid. It passes through the optic canal with the optic nerve to supply the contents of the orbit. It is first infralateral to the optic nerve, then crosses above the nerve from the lateral to the medial side with the superior ophthalmic vein in close vicinity. The nasociliary nerve is above it in the posterior part of the orbit. Now let's watch a few identification points. Now that's the optic nerve. That's the ophthalmic artery. Watch carefully how it winds around from an infralateral position to a superior position, and thereafter how it is medial to the optic nerve. All this occurs so above the optic nerve, infralateral, then above, and then medial to the optic nerve. Then accompanying it all along is the superior ophthalmic vein. Watch, this vein is very important. It is a valveless vein formed close to the medial part of the orbit. It is in communication with the facial vein. Being valveless, it can cross communicate, transfer blood in either directions. As a result, it can transmit infection to the cavernous sinus. So keep a note on this vein. That's the nasociliary nerve shown superficial to it. Now, as the ophthalmic artery becomes lateral to the optic nerve, immediately lateral to it will be the ciliary ganglion. That is why the nasociliary nerve is shown in this demonstration. Immediately lateral to the ophthalmic artery will be the ciliary ganglion, not shown in this demo. Branches. The central artery of the retina is the most important branch. For all practical purposes, it is a end artery. Although there is a little communication with the ciliary arteries, it is for all functionality an end artery. As a result, thrombosis or any compression of this artery can result in total blindness. That's the applied anatomy of this central artery of the retina. That is the first branch or the important branch of the ophthalmic artery. Then there are the supratrochlear and supraorbital arteries, which along with the corresponding nerves move out of the orbital margin and are seen in the forehead and scalp. Lacrimal branch goes along with the lacrimal nerve along the lateral side of the orbit to the lacrimal gland. Number of muscular branches are there to the local muscles here. Then there are ciliary arteries, short and long posterior ciliary arteries. There are also anterior ciliary arteries. Anterior ethmoidal branch. These are some of the branches of the ophthalmic artery. By and large, these extraocular muscles are developed from somites. These muscles are supplied by the oculomotor nerve, namely the superior and inferior rectus, the medial rectus, and the inferior oblique. The superior oblique is supplied by the trochlear nerve and develops from the second head somite. The other muscles are from the first head somite. The muscle supplied by the abducens nerve, namely the lateral rectus, develops from the third head somite. That means some of the earlier somites, that is, at the earlier somites at the cranial end of the developing embryo, contribute to the formation of extraocular. Just to test the integrity of these extraocular muscles, in view of the actions, we will take a look at this diagram. This is a typical textbook like diagram. Only difference is we will view it in the background of the movement of the eye as seen in this cadaveric photograph. Upwards and medially, if you ask the living patient to move the eyeball upwards and medially, or upwards and nasally, you are testing the integrity of the inferior oblique. If you ask the patient to move the eyeball downwards and nasally, you are testing the integrity of the superior oblique. Simple medial movement, if you ask him to do, simply move the eyeball nasally, then it is medial rectus. Normally how we do in this thing is, we ask the patient to follow the tip of the finger. Depending upon what muscle you want to test, you raise the finger correspondingly to that position corresponding to the eyeball. That way the patient will respond. Based on the response, you will know which muscle is paralyzed or working. Ideally, we try to move the muscles in the direction of their best action. That is why upwards and nasally tests the inferior oblique, downwards and nasally tests the superior oblique, direct medial movement tests the medial rectus, direct lateral movement tests the lateral rectus, upwards and laterally tests the superior rectus. I repeat, upwards and laterally tests the superior rectus, downwards and medially tests the inferior rectus. So these are some of the ways by which the extraocular muscles can be tested. Now here you can see some of the structures originating from the region of the apex of the orbit. So I felt this may be a very important area for discussion. You can see there are the inferior ophthalmic vein is labeled. Similarly, on the other side there is a superior ophthalmic vein. The first structure that needs to be identified is the optic nerve. That blinking animation is the optic nerve. There is a common tendinous ring around it. Then the structure marked is the trochlear immediately above. That's the trochlear nerve. Okay, you can see that it is going to the superior oblique muscle. Watch carefully the next few animations. After the trochlear, the abducent nerve moving laterally towards the lateral rectus. Nasociliary, once again running upwards and medially. Oculomotor upper root, or upper part of the oculomotor nerve, you can see it going to the medial rectus. Oculomotor lower going to the inferior oblique and inferior rectus. You can also see that's there to the inferior oblique. You can also see the ciliary ganglion in the same description. You can see that the eyeball is hanging in the middle of the orbital cavity. How is this possible? There is a condensation of fascia called the suspensory ligament of Lockwood, because of which the eyeball is kept intact. Otherwise it would have fallen off towards the floor. It is not so because of the integrity of this ligament, namely the suspensory ligament of Lockwood. It has a medial extension called the medial check ligament and a lateral extension called the lateral check ligament. The lateral check ligament ends at the Wittnall's tubercle. The lateral check ligament ends at the Wittnall's tubercle. Posteriorly, this suspensory ligament extends as facial sheaths around the muscles, and then it is conveyed towards the base of the orbit, where it fuses with the perimysium of the respective muscles. Sometimes the eyeball can be protruding out in a condition known as Graves' disease, where it is known as exophthalmos. However, this is more a metabolic condition, and this sign has got nothing to do with damaging of the integrity of the suspensory ligament of Lockwood. That was a discussion on the orbit. Thanks.